Hi, I'm Laura Flanders. Welcome to Grit TV.
This is Grit TV, current affairs programming that puts the public back in the public debate. Hosted by best-selling author and broadcaster Laura Flanders. Grit TV is a daily discussion for people who want to make a difference with real questions.
Can you imagine how many mortgages you could refinance for $700 billion?
Rather than bailing out, we should have bought them out.
Public oversight in these companies.
These are the companies that created the problem for us.
What would happen if I took some chemicals like I got and took them to like the big bossy in Canada and dumped them in as well? They'd have me in the pen so fast my head would spin.
And real people about what's working.
From the time we started organizing to the time we actually got to a vote, it took us 2 years.
And what's not.
2.5 million Iraqis out of a population of 25 million who've been displaced internally. Where's the moral condemnation for this?
It was just 6 years ago that Olive Thompson purchased a home right here. She now faces the possibility of eviction.
Every 4 months, additional $400 was on the loan.
Grit TV takes time to talk in depth with some of the smartest thinkers and doers of our time.
We're afraid of remembering, thinking, feeling.
What does socialism mean to the people of Bolivia and to you?
Socialism is a solution for humanity in the 21st century.
If their employer doesn't opt for the public plan, will they be able to opt for it?
Not right now. I don't think you can make this conversion immediately, and especially in an area as personal as healthcare.
Meet the artists of the moment. And each week, another independent film.
One of the last things I said to him was, I love you more than life itself.
This is Grit TV coming to you from Washington, D.C. Inauguration Week 2009. With us, John Nichols, Bill Fletcher, Eve Ensler.
With guest commentaries and viewer-generated videos. Grit TV reaches millions of viewers weekly on satellite, cable, on public TV stations, and anytime, anywhere online. It is new media for new audiences. Have you got Grit TV?
All right, that's Grit TV. Happy Living as Form Day, everybody. Thanks so much for inviting me. You know, I was curious why I was invited. You know, I do politics and current affairs and news. I'm a journalist or something pretending to be a journalist in that particular living as form. And I thought, well, what do I have to offer to the artists of creative time? And NATO said, well, just talk to them about why you are so committed to including art in your show. Why do you put artists on Grit TV? And I have to admit, it's not the first time I've been asked that question. We have a commitment to bringing artists like many of you on the program, if not on a daily basis, at least on a weekly basis. And why? I thought, you know, is it just, you know, light relief, a little kind of palate cleanser, a time for something entirely different? Is it just a free speech moment? I should probably tell you what a free speech moment is, as some of you are visiting this country of ours. A free speech moment, you probably think you're in the land of the free, right? In the First Amendment, right of free speech. Well, we do still have free speech. The Supreme Court weighed in on it recently. We have it as long as we're a corporation. For the rest of us, there's been an update. Quite a few updates, actually. We now have a kind of handy-dandy pocket version of the First Amendment, where we have what are called free speech zones. This city was host to a few of them when we hosted the Republican National Convention. Anybody got caught in a free speech zone? They actually were originated by the wonderful Democrats at their 2004 convention, and we've had them ever since. They're kind of walled-off areas where if you can get in, you can have free speech. Fabulous. We have them now. We had them this week in Georgia outside the death house as Troy Davis was executed by the state. There was a free speech zone. They called it a pen for the family. People who actually had a relationship with Troy Davis or cared about him deeply or had some relationship to his case were allowed to be in the pen where they could talk to each other and talk to the press. If they didn't behave, they were thrown out of the pen. So them's your options, people. You have the pen or you have getting thrown out of the pen, which is worse. Downtown right now at Wall Street, we have an even more updated version of free speech. We have, well, you have speech, but you don't have the right to be heard. At the Occupy Wall Street protests, yay to everybody who's watching on the stream. You can also watch the stream later of the Wall Street protests. At the Wall Street protests, they're very concerned. You can say whatever you like, but you can't use a megaphone. So speech, but no being heard. That's the political version of these free speech zones. And I think in the art world, we've seen something similar. I don't know, censorship, poverty, obscenity clauses, you name it. I think of it as kind of insulate or isolate. Those are the two options. Insulate, anybody insulated in this room? That's where they pour so much money at you and put you in such a pretty private paradise that you forget why you went into art in the first place. Any of you in that category? Huh, funny that. If you're not insulated, you're probably isolated. That's the ejection from the pen. That's the, we'll put you on some little reservation out there in the wilderness somehow, sometime, somewhere, and cover you sometimes like kind of, I don't know, endangered species. Or we might let you come into a little bit closer to our neighborhoods, have a little art street, or an art park, and we go and feed the animals once in a while as long as they don't disturb the peace. That's the point, really, the disturbing the peace part, right? And I think that that's, in a way, what connects me to you. I think that there are a lot of journalists, like there are a lot of artists who have gone for one of those two options, insulate or isolate. For sure, in my world, we have a slew of them, but we have a few of us who have not. Public media, I think of as the alternative to corporate media. Corporate media delivers the public to the advertisers. This news report brought to you by the people that bring you war. At the same time, we have public media, which is about this stuff. We don't know how to fund it, but we are about bringing the public to each other, making a connection. And I think that when they have the last one of us, the last public artist and the last public journalist out there on the gurney, the last member of the species has kicked the bucket, and they're digging into our body to find out, what was it that inspired them? Or maybe we're getting prepared to be embalmed, I don't know. Can you see us in the Art Park Museum? Natural history, artist, public journalist. They'll find a gene, they'll find a, I don't know, you think about mind over matter. I think they'll find a something matters more than money gene. A little gene that says, you know what, beauty is more than the bottom line. There is something that makes us people different from how corporations claim to be people. And David Brooks wrote recently, I know many of you are now fainting because I'm going to say something positive about David Brooks, New York Times columnist. David Brooks wrote recently about his definition of an altruist. Go to strange places, talk to strange people, and keep at it with no visible sign of reward. You can relate. I can relate. He talked about non-contingent commitment. And I think that's the gene we've got. And I just am here to say that that is a very big deal. That is a very big deal in these times because contingent status, contingent self is what we've got, right? This is the consumer society where we are consumers, we the people are consumers, the corporations are people. And as Tim Jackson, the economist at Oxford, I think, put it, he said, this is the society that rules according to the story that encourages us to buy at whatever cost. There are wars, there's poverty, there's a job crisis. What we've got to salve all that ails us, post-traumatic shopping. And to reject post-traumatic shopping is a very, very big deal. He talks about it as a culture of spending money we don't have, to buy things we don't want, to create influences that don't last on people we don't care about. And that's the story of the crash. And that's the only idea we've got when it comes to running our society. That's it. But there's another way that beauty is different from the bottom line. Something matters more than money. People are a very big deal. And that's one thing that I differ with David Brooks on. I don't think it's altruism in the sense of self-abnegation, all about the other. With all of us, there is something about self, right? You're in this a little bit to do with self. But it's not just self. I think that's the point. It's not just self. When I think of Paul Chan's work in New Orleans, or Merle Euclides is here, or Lois Weaver's here, putting up laundry in inconvenient places, or Rick Lowe, or Marshall Reese with his ice blocks spelling middle class that melt from 1,000 cuts. There's something else going on. Something to do with what Muhammad Ali talked about when he was asked for a short poem, and he was speaking to MIT people, and he was asked for a short poem, and he said, here's a short poem. You, me, we. And they all sat there, befuddled. But I think this something matters more than money, Jean, has something to do with that, right? Something to do with we. And in that, what is driving you in the same way that what's driving me, this idea that there's something about a person that's different from Chevron, that connects us with history. That connects us with everything in US history and in world history that has brought us in a positive direction. Because that notion that there is, sure, a self to be freed from tyranny, to get out of the pen, to get out of isolation. There's a self to be freed, but there is also a public to be empowered. That is what motivated the peasant revolts, the abolitionists, the movements for women's votes, for a whole lot more than that. For sexual liberation, for civil rights. Civil rights, the anthem was not. The anthem was lift every voice, not every Visa card. The anthem was you matter, but we all matter. And that definition of freedom is the opposite definition of freedom from what the Tea Partiers today think of. Get yours, get ahead. But it is the kind of original idea of this country. Thomas Jefferson talked about a society motivated by fellow feeling. Well, fellow feeling is in short supply these days, and we need it back. So that's why we need you back. Maybe not you, but those of you who are out there in the world of isolation and insulation, we need those artists back. Because we're involved in a very public project right now that has only a public answer. We're involved in a save the planet kind of a project right now that can't be resolved by buying things we don't need to impress people we don't care about kind of a way. Post-traumatic shopping will not save us. I don't know how many of you are listening to anything they're saying at the United Nations or listening to what people have been saying at the protests, the biggest ever protests for the environment last month, 1,000 people arrested with Bill McKibben and others outside the White House. They're talking about what we're doing right now is putting us on a crisis path with not just prosperity, but with the planet. We're consuming enough for 1.5 planets worth of space and resources every year. And any loan officer will tell you that's not smart. We're looking at population growth of probably another 2 billion people, all of whom expecting to live like we live, with that post-traumatic urge to shop. And our planet simply can't handle it. By 2050, we'll be consuming and needing waste amounting to 2 planets worth every year. And this one planet is the only one we've got. The consequences of that are already being felt. Fish. A third of all fisheries producing fish that we humans eat have failed already, meaning dropped by 90%. By 2048, all of the fisheries producing the fish that we eat will have crashed by 90%. That's 500 million people who are living dependent on fish and fisheries. left high and dry, or maybe, I don't know, wet. We have a public problem that needs a public redefinition of that whole idea of prosperity. Tim Jackson talks about the roots of the word prospere having to do with asking and questioning and hopes. Hopes. That puts it back in your world. That puts it back in the field of creativity. We're in a moment, an urgent moment, where we need public creativity in public spaces that defends the very notion of the public. I was recently in Wisconsin, where they occupied the State House. And they occupied it with art and dancing and performance and poetry and much more than that. And they claimed that space, and they claimed it for a month, and it was that experience of being in that public space with a law that defended their right to be in that public space that made something happen that gave people in this country hope, right? How many of you heard about the protests in Wisconsin? Yeah. And they were fighting for public workers who are under attack. And they were fighting for public services and public schools and public education. And that public creativity in a public space is what we need much more of, and we need it from you. Instead of conspicuous consumption, we need conspicuous creativity. And we need, in the same way that we've had an Arab Spring, we need an artist spring. The good news is we're primed for it. I don't know how many of you read the new naturalism, the new biology, the new science about us as humans. But if you read any of that, you'll hear that we are not the only ones with the something matters more than money gene, with the beauty is not the bottom line gene. In fact, it's common to all of us. I was down at 9/11 for the 10th anniversary. I went down to the Ground Zero site and saw people looking around at each other, looking around for some way to connect. And there was kind of no way for them to connect, nothing for them to actually physically do. They needed you. In Georgia, after the Georgia execution, I was actually in Washington, went to the Supreme Court. People gathered similarly looking for other people, and there was nothing really for them to do, no way to connect. They needed you. And frankly, down in Wall Street, there are people gathering. They need you. Conspicuous creativity on behalf of the public is what's needed, because not only do you remind us that that space is important, you claim that space, but you give us that fellow feeling, that experience that no matter how much talking, no end of politicians and philosophers and policy analysts can give us, you give us that feeling of being part of a public that makes us feel good. And I'm reminded just before I close of the story from a new book I read, The Age of Empathy, a very optimistic book that was written at the beginning of the Clinton administration, where he writes, he studies humans and he studies chimps, Frans de Waal. He writes about an experiment that he had, where it wasn't really an experiment. They've had the same pen for their chimps for 30 years, the same pen. And the pen has got metal bars for the chimps to clamber on. And they thought, these metal bars for 30 years, that's just too much. We need to give them something nicer. So they brought in telephone poles and trees, and they erected this gorgeous jungle gym. And on the day that they were going to open this gym, they were all excited. And they sat back, and apparently the scientists in their scientific coats with their scientific haircuts, they had their scientific notebooks, and they were placing bets. Which of their chimps was going to be the first to the top of the new jungle gym? I'm not there yet. And they sat back and they watched, and what happened? The chimps came out and looked around, didn't even look up. They only saw each other. And for 3 weeks, the chimps greeted each other, kissed each other, removed nits from each other's hair, groomed each other. Because what the scientists had forgotten was that for the time they were building the new jungle gym, they had locked these people away, these chimps away. They hadn't seen each other. They'd been in isolation. And as soon as they opened that space, the chimps came back. And the most important thing in the chimp DNA was other chimps. And the scientists sat back and said, who's the chimp and who's the chump? Creative time, that's where we're at. That's you. Thanks. Get to work.